All right. Hello, everybody. It's Allie with the Perception Trainers, author of the Perception Diet, and today I have Mr. Andrew Perlot here with me on my channel, and we are going to talk about how amazing he is, basically.
Yeah?
Okay, so basically, if you don't already know, Andrew is the owner of RenaissanceHumans.com and previously of rawfoodhealth.net fame. And so he's got a really awesome YouTube channel and a website where he talks all about health and raw foods and meditation and exercise and fitness and just kind of really delving into the science behind wellness and the science behind living well, right? But what I want to talk about today is his journey to wellness, because he was not born like this. Yeah? Or maybe you were born like this.
I was born like this.
Right, and then you went off track maybe.
That would have been awkward for the birth canal.
Right, that would have been. Your mom. Okay, so he was born awesome, and that's what I meant by like this, but maybe not in this body.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's start with way back in the day. You had lots of health issues as a child, right?
Yeah.
So go ahead, tell us about that.
I started to be pretty overweight by the time I was in elementary school.
Okay.
Like, I don't know, 3rd or 4th grade, I was already overweight. And
Sure.
by the time that got into high school, like I was 16, 17 years old, I was about 220 pounds.
Okay.
So I had a variety of health issues. One was that I remember, like, trying to run in sports and just not being able to breathe well.
Right.
Part of that was because I was really overweight, but part of it I think was dairy and then the rest of my diet.
Yeah.
I had, by the time I was a teenager, horrible migraine headaches.
Okay.
Beginning in middle school, I had symptoms of basically a messed up digestive system that years down the road would be diagnosed as colitis.
Okay.
And garden variety of other issues, and I was pretty depressed.
Right. Okay. So, colitis is essentially inflammation in the colon.
It's an autoimmune condition, so basically the body is attacking its own intestines, so that gets really, I don't want to give you too much of a graphic answer there, but basically your intestines are bleeding and pussing, and you have constipation / uncontrollable diarrhea, so not a pleasant thing.
No, and pain. Like
pain, oh yeah.
Lots of pain.
Mm-hmm.
And so even just that, right? Like your ability to live is really like destroyed in a lot of ways. And even just like, so your intestines are acting the way that they're acting, it's your body attacking itself. So like any attempts you're gonna make to even just like eat a healthy diet or like try and feel better or nourish yourself, it feels like there's a backlash for that. Is that kind of how it felt?
Yeah, well, when people are talking about healthy eating on like the lowest level concept, usually it's like eat fiber rich foods.
Yeah.
Fiber, when your system is irritated like that, is just like
Yeah.
know.
Totally. Okay, so when you were diagnosed with colitis, what did your doctor say about it, essentially?
So I was in college at that time, and I went to a doctor out by my school, and he told me I had colitis. And so I'm like, okay, well, how am I going to get rid of this colitis?
Yeah.
And it like, that was my mindset. Like, what do I go about doing so I no longer am dying?
Yeah, exactly.
And his response was like, oh, no, you misunderstood me. You have this forever.
Right.
Forever.
Right, exactly. There is no getting over it. This is your life now. Yeah.
So let me explain how miserable your existence will be, and these wonderful drugs I can give you to make it less miserable in the slightest way.
Right. Okay.
So that was kind of how he laid it out.
Okay, so he basically said colitis is a thing that you have now, and there's no cure.
And not only is it just a thing, but I was not at all responsible.
Right.
Nothing that I had done or could do would ever change that. It was genetics, just fate.
Okay, so you were essentially handed this idea that your sickness was permanent. It was not your fault. There was no cause. There was no cure.
Yep.
Okay. So now, today, let's just fast forward. Do you have colitis?
Well, according to who? I mean, I have none of the symptoms of colitis. I have a digestive system that works pretty well, if not as well as a really healthy person, then pretty close.
Right, okay.
And I would say that no, I don't. But if, for instance, there's probably still scar tissue along my intestines.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's kind of a hard do I have it. And if I went back to eating how I did, I think I would eventually run into problems.
Okay. So essentially what you're saying is today you currently live with no symptoms of colitis. You figured out a way that your life is not colitis management. It is life again. Yeah? Okay. So this is the important point that I kind of want to talk about. What was it that made you hear that diagnosis of colitis forever, not your fault, can't do anything about it, and you hearing that and then said, no, I'm going to heal, I'm going to figure this out, I'm going to get better? Like, what was it in your mind that happened there?
You know, it's a really interesting question because I had been on a journey from really the time I was around like 16 or 17 in a really miserable state and just so depressed and thinking like I'm worthless. I just couldn't see a way out. I just assumed that I was worthless. I looked at the way that my performance in school isn't good. I'm dumb. I will be dumb forever. Because no one had taught me really how to memorize things easily for me and like learning in a way that worked for me.
Yeah.
And I was really overweight and I was so ashamed of my body. I remember I actually had really bad back pain when I was younger, and part of it was because I sat too much and I was overweight, but a lot of it was like hunching forward, like I was trying to disappear or just like don't see me. And so when I kind of just assumed that, I think like most people, how do I put this? The way that I used to think about myself back then was the extreme example of how most people look at colitis. So when I say that, I mean that I believed that I was overweight and nothing I could do would change it. Because and to some extent you could see how like a young person might come to this conclusion. Like, my brother ate the exact diet that I did. It's not like I was eating ridiculous quantities of food or like even super unhealthy food by American standards. And like my brother was a couple of years older than me, skinny, incredibly skinny. And so it's easy to be like, look at that. Like, how is that fair?
Yeah.
And just being like, I'm broken.
Exactly.
Nothing I can do about it.
I'm messed up and there's nothing I can do about it. Yeah, exactly.
But when I was around 16, 17, I started, for the first time in my life, I actually went and tried Ninjutsu, and I honestly don't even remember what the impetus was, but Ninjutsu is a martial art. And I wasn't athletic. I was fat, and I couldn't really do, but I went and I just started working on it, and, after a few months, I noticed that I had lost a little weight, and then it was kind of like, well, maybe I could actually modify other things on some level and create more change. And it was like, at first it was little changes, like I'm not going to drink dairy anymore, I'm going to cut back on soda and desserts. I'm just going to eat a really small lunch or whatever. And just seeing that I had the power to affect my reality in that way may seem like the smallest thing ever to people watching, because it's like, oh, you ran a calorie deficit? What did you think was going to happen? But to me, that's not where I was. Like, if you had been like, Andrew, you could fix this situation by running a calorie deficit, I would have been like,
whatever.
Okay.
Sure, maybe a normal person could, but not for me.
So that was the beginning, and it showed me that I had power in this reality. It showed me that I could affect my own reality and change things, and that changed my worldview in so many ways.
Right.
And gradually, I kept upping the diet ante.
Okay, yeah.
First it was just small improvements, and then it was I'm going to be on a cooked vegan diet, and then, I was exercising more, I started running, and, all of my health problems were getting better except my colitis, which was actually getting worse.
Right, okay.
And so eventually, I'm in college, and I get this, doctor saying, oh no, this is what you will have for the rest of my life. And most people at that point would have been like, okay, sign me up for the drugs, I'm screwed.
Exactly. Yeah.
But for me, I had been on this path of thinking more and more that I had more and more control, and that I was just able to control everything, and that my actions had tons of power.
Right.
And so I was thinking, this guy's full of BS, because for one, I've kept a food journal and I know that my symptoms change depending on what I'm eating.
Right.
And two, I just believe inherently that the body has to be vectoring towards health if I get out of its way.
Right.
Because that's the lesson I've been teaching myself. If I stop hurting myself in ways, and most people don't, and I didn't think that I was really hurting myself, but I was.
Yeah.
If I just find a way to get out of my body's way in ways that are bothering it will get better.
Totally.
And that was how I did it.
Amazing. Okay, so it was basically you saying, okay, there are pervasive belief systems in society that say some of these things are incurable and there's nothing we can do about it, or this is healthy even though it's not actually working, right? And you are basically saying I'm going to go for the actual evidence. I'm going to go for the actual reality versus the belief system. Do you think that kind of could boil it down? Maybe you weren't consciously thinking of it that way, but you were like, I'm not going to just believe it because you told me it.
Yeah, I was just, I don't know. I remember talking to the doctor and just being like, I don't believe you.
Right.
There is a way that is out, the way out, and I'm going to find it, and that's it.
Right, exactly. So what did that feel like? So what was that feeling that you had inside of you that was like, you're wrong, and I'm going to figure this out?
I remember being angry at first. Angry at the medical system. Part of it was man, how much crap is gonna get piled on me? It's one thing after the other. But then it was okay, I gotta fix this too. Maybe the doctor can help me. But it was after dealing with that, it's no, this guy doesn't know anything.
Right.
This guy, I'm gonna. And so it was kind of discussed. But then it was I'm very methodical.
Yeah.
You know this.
Yes, he's very methodical.
And so I began testing things, and most of it didn't work.
Right.
Most of it didn't work.
Okay.
I basically was experimenting with all varieties of food, and eventually what worked was fruit.
Right.
And I actually only ate bananas for about 2 months.
Right.
but that
desperate times.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of how that happened.
Okay, so first things first is you experienced anger, and you experienced these kind of negative emotions, but in a sense, for a period of time, they drove you, right?
Yeah.
That anger was useful, and I think that's a point that I would like to kind of make, is that it's not that your negative emotions were bad, right? You weren't oh, I gotta go address my anger.
Yeah.
You were fuck this, and that's kind of what propelled you forward, and I think that's just a little point to make, that not all negative emotions are negative. It's not so bad. So now the second thing that I want to ask you is, when you were trying things and they weren't working, what was it that made you not give up?
Because even though they weren't working, I was getting feedback that my diet was impacting my colitis in my symptoms.
Yeah.
And so I just had to keep looking, even though I knew there had to be some combination of changes that I can make that would do it, even if I wasn't finding them at that instance.
So it's kind of you're saying you're looking at the failures as information that was leading you closer to the truth. So rather than being oh, I failed, it didn't work, it doesn't work. You were oh, I failed, and that's just leading me one step closer to what is going to work.
Yep.
And I think
failing my way forward.
Yeah, that's so good. Okay, so to wrap up this awesome interview, it's basically I want you to say that, or no, I don't want you to say that. Basically,
What do you want me to say? I'll say anything.
Yeah, exactly. But I think that the takeaway from this is, number one, that you have control over your life, and that it's not just, you know, shitty things happen and then you're fucked, right? That there is something inside
Can
of
I get that on a t-shirt?
Yeah, exactly.
Shitty things happen and then you're fucked.
It's like, no, we have choice, right? And so it would have been, at the time, easier for you to be like, oh, okay, right? I have colitis and this is something I'm going to have for the rest of my life and I'll take the drugs.
Yep.
That technically would have been easier in the moment.
Yeah.
But long term, that wouldn't have been easier.
No.
Right? Because you would have been dealing with colitis for the rest of your life.
And there's ramifications of those drugs. I mean, there's side effects, but then there's the fact that you kind of become dependent on them, and then getting off them is even more challenging. So it's kind of like a slippery slope.
Right, exactly. So essentially, what we're saying is like, number one thing, to abdicate responsibility for what's going on in your life, at first is going to seem like the easier option. But over time, if you really look at it, it isn't. Right? Taking responsibility for yourself actually is freeing and empowering.
Yeah. I believe that every horrible thing that has happened to me is a result of me on some level.
Right.
I don't blame outside circumstances, and I find that internalization of it to be incredibly empowering, because if you cause things, you can fix things.
Exactly.
So yeah, I view it as a wonderful thing.
Perfect. Okay, so that's awesome. Number two, negative emotions, not always totally negative, right? Like your negative emotions essentially for the first little while helped you. And so rather than you like fighting those negative emotions or trying to like not be angry or not be upset or whatever, you used it. And I think that that's like a really important thing to say, is that like, you know, if you've been diagnosed with something or someone tells you that you can't, or that, right, you're broken, there's something wrong with you, and that anger or that frustration or that whatever fire rises inside of you, use it. Right? That's not a negative emotion that you need to then go like spiritualize away, right? That's a natural arising for a reason. And then the third thing, the takeaway, is that you can't fail, right? Is that every time you try something, you learn, and that actually brings you closer to where you're headed. So rather than looking at it and being like, I've tried 100 different things and none of them have worked, I suck, or this isn't possible, or whatever, to look at it like, no, like those were 100 pieces of information that I didn't have before, right? Because like I feel the same way about like all the healing journeys that I've been on. It's like it was more failure than it was success, if you look at it that way. But I would prefer to look at it like it was more information gathering than it was results, because the result was the one thing, right? But it took all of the information gathering to get there, right?
Yeah.
So I hope this inspires you, that if you've got something going on in your life, or someone's told you that you're fucked in some way, essentially, that you say like, no, I'm gonna let myself get angry, I'm gonna let myself get, you know, rebellious, and I'm gonna let myself fail over and over and over again to find what really works for me. And I think the last thing is that, you know, be your own authority, right? Like, don't let someone else tell you what your life is. And I think that Andrew is like such a perfect example of that, is that you decide who you are and what your life is going to be. And I think that I really admire that. You don't look for someone to tell you who you are and what you are. You decide that. And you're like really free because of it, right? Like the result of that is just plain and simple.
I like how a lot of the times, I mean, I've said this a little bit before, but it's kind of like these horrible things happen to you, but once you're through the horrible thing, you often are very grateful for the horrible thing.
Exactly.
Because it has freed you and made you grow in ways that you could not possibly imagine.
Exactly. So life is not about avoiding the shitty things. It's about going through them, because it's going to make you so much better. Yeah. All right. So that's all the time we have. I will put links to Andrew's channel below, because he's amazing and you should find him and read all of his stuff and listen to all of his videos and all that stuff. And we will see you in the next video. Yay!